Welcome to the world today. I am Amarachi Ubani. So Kurdish fighters have been engaged in fierce gun battles with Islamic State militants in the Syrian border town of Kobani. That's the last town left with ISIS and they're trying everything they can to get hold of it. Now, the US-led coalition airstrikes have continued still in Kobani and in other areas in Syria. In the latest reports, the US Central Command says 6 airstrikes had destroyed IS weaponry around Kobani. The UN envoy for Syria has urged the international community to act now in order to prevent ISIS from seizing that key town.
As the US-led airstrikes continue and a ground offensive by Kurds aimed at suppressing the Islamic State, demonstrations have also been taking place in Turkey. They partly blame Ankara for Islamic State's gaining power, and they also want the government to do more to protect the Kurdish town of Kobani in Syria from the militants. Unfortunately, the protests were anything but peaceful, as at least 9 people have been killed in clashes between ethnic Kurds and Turkish police. In Adana, police fired live bullets. They say the protesters were trying to attack a police station. In Istanbul, police used tear gas, while protesters retaliated with fireworks. Human rights groups say at least 400 people in Kobani have died after a 3-week assault by militants. Meanwhile, US-led airstrikes on Wednesday, October the 8th, pushed Islamic State fighters back to the edges of the Syrian-Kurdish border town of Kobani, which they had appeared set to seize after a 3-week assault. A video clip said to be from the pro-Islamic State media group and which cannot independently be verified shows fighter jets in the sky and dark plumes of smoke on the ground. Kobani has become the focus of international attention since the Islamist advance drove 180,000 of the area's mostly Kurdish inhabitants to flee into adjoining Turkey, which has infuriated its own restive Kurdish minority by refusing to intervene. Islamic State hoisted its black flag on the eastern edge of the town on Monday. But since then, airstrikes by a US-led coalition that includes Gulf states opposed to Islamic State have redoubled. Islamic State wants to take Kobani in order to strengthen its grip on the border area and consolidate the territorial gains it has made in Iraq and Syria in recent months. As for those keen on joining the extremist group, the FBI is seeking the public's help in identifying a man the agency says appeared in an Islamic State propaganda in September. According to the Federal Law Enforcement Agency, the man was heard speaking both in Arabic and English with a North American accent. The agency hoped that releasing a clip from the video online will help lead to possible tips. It is believed that there are fewer than 10 Western hostages held by the Islamic State at this time. 4 Westerners have been beheaded by the Islamic State, which has come under air attack in Iraq and Syria by US, British, French, and Arab fighter jets.
Well, the VOA's Cal Perry has been monitoring ISIS and its activities in Syria, as well as what's going on in Kobani. Cal, thank you for joining us on The World today. And let's begin with what you've heard about the intensity of the fighting in Kobani.
It's incredibly intense. Reports from the ground, and we're hearing from reporters who covered the war in Iraq, starting in 2003, people who were there for the 10 years where the fighting was really bad. They say it's worse than it was almost at the worst time in Iraq in the cities of Fallujah and Ramadi. The eyewitness reports are that dozens at times of different weapons are firing in and around the city center. They're hearing grenade explosions. There was a massive truck bomb earlier today that went off right in the city center. That was an Islamic State truck bomb trying to take out a command and control center that the Kurds had set up in the center of that city. So the fighting is incredibly intense, and defense officials here in Washington have said they believe the city is likely to fall.
And Kobani happens to be the last city under ISIS control. How important is it? It's right at the border between Syria and Turkey.
It's vitally important. I thought the report that you played before I came on did an excellent job of laying out sort of the geographical importance of not only the city for ISIS, but the city for Turkey and for the coalition. The ISIS fighters are trying to do two things when they take these border towns. They're trying to bring fighters into Syria, and they're trying to move oil out of Syria. So as they take these oil fields, they're trying to figure out a way to sell the oil on the open market. They need these towns to do that, and they need to bring fighters in. So these towns are basically exactly as they sound. They're border towns, they are checkpoints, they are crossings for these ISIS fighters, and this is the last in a string of towns to be taken. Once they take this town, they will have a stretch of about 100 kilometers from Raqqa to the south, all the way to the north, right along that Turkish border.
Well, we haven't heard anything yet about the hostages still being held by ISIS. I don't know if you have any information on any of those hostages.
No, it's just an incredibly grim situation, and you see the difficult situation that Turkey finds itself in. If it intervenes, it could potentially see a flashback in the streets of Istanbul from ISIS. If it does, in the streets from the Kurds, the U.S. is in a position where it seems like it can't do anything right. If it bombs these targets, they're worried about on the ground. That's a kinetic concern, is how the military would put it. How do you choose targets when you don't know where the hostages are? You don't know the condition that they're in. Excuse me. And there's a one-way line of communication happening through social media. We're finding out about these hostages at the same time that the U.S. president does, because they're posting the video where everybody can see it.
Well, that's really interesting, Cal, because it really makes it difficult to authenticate some of these videos and what's really going on in Kobani as well as what's going on in Syria, right?
Well, and it changes the debate. It controls information. I mean, this is a war of information as well as a war that's happening on the ground, and ISIS is incredibly savvy on social media. They've figured out a way to penetrate homes in the West and in Europe. We've seen people in London, young people in London, in America, heading to Syria because they're attracted to what they see on social media. And at the same time, these administrations around the world, it's not just the Obama administration that's facing this, but the governments in Europe are in a situation where this information war, the playing field has been leveled. I mean, ISIS has leveled this playing field, and they've figured the game out. They can put stuff out as quickly as any other government, and they can reach homes as quickly as any other government in the world, and they're doing an incredibly good job at it.
And Cal, the coalition forces continue their airstrikes in other parts of Syria. Tell us how that's going. What do you know?
So it's the airstrikes, and I'm sorry you broke up there a bit at the end. The airstrikes in these other parts of Syria, it's a stopgap measure, I think, a lot of these times. I mean, the situation is so out of control. The intelligence coming from the ground is so limited to the coalition, because you hear this phrase, boots on the ground, and the resistance that the American public has to putting boots on the ground. Well, the resistance is there because when people are so close, of course, to this fighting and this combat, that's when you incur casualties. Well, that's the problem that the U.S. military is facing now. When it's trying to find targets, when it's